What if the US border wall started collapsing? Would it be a symbol of security or just another billion-dollar engineering disaster? History has seen massive projects fail, bridges twisting apart, skyscrapers melting cars, and entire buildings toppling over intact. Could the border wall be next? Reports already show sections collapsing, erosion damage, and structural flaws. From a warship that sank minutes after launch to a hotel that crumbled before opening, these disasters prove that bad design, rushed construction, and political pressure lead to failure. How many of these disasters were preventable? Could the border wall become another cautionary tale? And what happens when cost-cutting outweighs safety? Let's dive in. 1. The Leaning Tower of Pisa. A beautiful miscalculation. In the 12th century, Pisa set out to build a grand bell tower to showcase its wealth and prestige. Designed to stand at nearly 200 feet tall, the tower was meant to be a symbol of architectural brilliance. But from the moment construction began in 1173, something was already going terribly wrong. As the tower rose to its third level, builders noticed an alarming problem. The foundation had begun to sink unevenly. The reason? The structure was built on soft, unstable soil composed of clay, sand, and silt. Unlike modern engineering, which prioritizes soil analysis, medieval architects had little understanding of how the ground beneath them would affect the stability of their masterpiece. Construction was halted for nearly 100 years due to a series of wars, and ironically, this delay may have saved the tower from immediate collapse. The soil had time to settle, preventing further shifting, but the lean remained. When work resumed in the 14th century, architects attempted to correct the tilt by building taller sections on one side. Instead of fixing the issue, this adjustment only moved the center of gravity, worsening the angle. By the time the tower was completed in 1372, it had become one of the most lopsided structures in the world. Over the centuries, the lean grew more severe, and experts feared a total collapse. Restoration efforts between 1993 and 2001 stabilized the structure, reducing the tilt by 17 inches. Today, the Leaning Tower of Pisa stands not just as a tourist attraction, but as a testament to how an engineering flaw can turn into an enduring icon. While Pisa's mistake had an oddly fortunate outcome, not all construction failures end in such an unexpected success story. Some result in utter devastation, like a modern high-rise in China that simply tipped over, intact. 2. The Lotus Riverside collapse. A building that fell like a domino. Shanghai's Lotus Riverside complex was meant to be a symbol of rapid urban development, a collection of high-rise residential buildings offering luxury apartments in one of China's most booming cities. The project appeared to be progressing smoothly, with towering structures nearly complete. But on the morning of June 27, 2009, disaster struck in one of the most surreal ways imaginable. A 13-story residential building didn't explode. It didn't crumble into dust. It simply fell over in one piece, crashing onto its side as if pushed by an invisible hand. It was an engineering failure so bizarre that it shocked experts around the world. The reason? A complete underestimation of how excavation and soil stability would affect the building's foundation. During construction, workers were digging an underground garage beneath the complex, removing large amounts of soil. At the same time, heavy rains soaked the ground, further destabilizing the already weak foundation. The soil on one side of the building was suddenly unable to support the structure's weight, causing the entire building to topple over like a domino. Amazingly, the structure remained largely intact, which only highlighted just how flawed the foundation was. The collapse resulted in the death of one worker and raised serious concerns about construction safety in rapidly developing urban areas. The disaster forced stricter regulations on high-rise developments in China, emphasizing the importance of thorough soil testing and structural stability before construction even begins. But this was just one case where engineering oversight led to disaster. In other instances, a single design change, one that seemed harmless at the time, was enough to bring about one of the deadliest structural failures in modern history. 3. The Hyatt Regency walkway collapse. A small change, a deadly consequence. On the night of July 17, 1981, the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri, was packed with guests attending a lively dance event in its grand atrium. Suspended above the crowd were two walkways, elegantly designed to connect the second and fourth floors, allowing guests to look down at the festivities below. But as the music played and people moved about, disaster struck. Without warning, both walkways collapsed, crashing onto the crowd beneath them. The result was one of the deadliest structural failures in American history, killing 114 people and injuring over 200. Investigators soon uncovered the shocking reason behind the collapse, a seemingly minor design change made during construction. Originally, the walkways were supposed to be suspended by a single set of steel rods. However, during construction, engineers modified the design, opting for two separate sets of rods instead. This decision doubled the load placed on the connection points, which were never designed to handle such weight. The additional strain caused the walkways to give way under pressure, leading to catastrophic failure. The disaster exposed a critical flaw in the approval process for structural changes. It led to stricter safety regulations in engineering, ensuring that even the smallest modifications undergo rigorous testing. But not all engineering failures are the result of small changes. Some are doomed from the very start, as seen in the collapse of a massive department store in South Korea. 4. The Sampoong department store collapse. A disaster, waiting to happen. In the early 1990s, the Sampoong department store in Seoul, South Korea, was a beacon of luxury, attracting thousands of shoppers each day. The five-story complex was supposed to be a symbol of modern urban development, offering high-end retail spaces, restaurants, and entertainment facilities. But beneath its polished exterior, the building was a ticking time bomb, and on June 29, 1995, the inevitable happened. At around 5 p.m., loud cracking sounds echoed through the structure. Within minutes, the roof caved in and the entire building collapsed, trapping and killing 502 people inside. Rescue workers searched through the rubble for weeks, making it one of the deadliest building collapses in modern history. The root cause of the disaster? Greed and negligence. Originally, the structure was designed as an office building, but during construction, its owners illegally modified the blueprints to add an extra floor for a department store. To make room for elevators and escalators, key support columns were removed, significantly weakening the building's stability. Engineers had noticed cracks forming in the months leading up to the collapse, but the owners ignored the warnings. Had they acted sooner, hundreds of lives could have been saved. The tragedy prompted South Korea to enforce stricter building regulations and tougher penalties for construction violations. But sometimes, it's not human greed that causes a disaster. It's the unseen dangers lurking beneath a structure, as seen in Florida's devastating condominium collapse. 5. The Champlain Tower's South collapse, a hidden danger beneath the surface. In the early hours of June 24, 2021, residents of Champlain Towers South in Surfside, Florida, were fast asleep when, without warning, a large section of the 12-story condominium crumbled to the ground. Within seconds, dozens of apartments were reduced to rubble, trapping residents beneath concrete and steel. 98 people lost their lives in one of the deadliest building collapses in American history. The cause of the collapse wasn't immediately clear, but as investigations unfolded, a disturbing truth emerged. Structural engineers had warned about serious damage to the building's foundation as early as 2018. Water intrusion from the pool deck had corroded steel reinforcements in the concrete, severely weakening the structure over time. To make matters worse, Champlain Towers South was built on reclaimed wetlands, meaning the ground beneath it was already prone to gradual sinking. The combination of environmental factors and neglected maintenance created the perfect conditions for disaster. The tragedy sent shockwaves across the country, prompting emergency inspections of other aging buildings in Florida and beyond. It also highlighted the dangers of delaying critical repairs, showing that even the strongest-looking structures can be hiding fatal weaknesses. But not all collapses happen due to years of neglect. Some are doomed from the moment they meet water, as seen in the case of the Teton Dam disaster. 6. The Teton Dam disaster, a reservoir that never stood a chance. In early June of 1976, The newly completed Teton Dam in Idaho stood as a marvel of modern engineering. Designed to control flooding and provide irrigation, the dam held back an immense reservoir of water, supporting thousands of residents and farmers in the region. But on June 5th, the unthinkable happened. The dam suffered a catastrophic failure, unleashing a wall of water that wiped out entire communities downstream. The collapse wasn't caused by an earthquake, an explosion, or an unexpected natural disaster. It was the result of a fundamental design flaw that had been ignored. Engineers had built the dam on highly porous volcanic rock, a material that allows water to seep through, slowly eroding the dam's internal structure. Small leaks had been detected in the days leading up to the failure, but efforts to seal them were too little, too late. When the dam finally gave way, more than 250,000 acre-feet of water surged into the valley, destroying homes, businesses, and farmland. 11 people lost their lives, and the damage cost billions to repair. The Teton Dam disaster became a harsh lesson in the importance of geological surveys and proper site selection for large-scale projects. It served as a warning that no amount of engineering expertise can overcome the forces of nature if the foundation itself is flawed. But sometimes, it's not the location that fails, it's the materials themselves, as seen in the shocking case of Berlin's exploding aquarium. 7. The Aquadom Aquarium. Burst, a glass tank that turned into a tsunami. In the early hours of December 16, 2022, guests at the Radisson Blu Hotel in Berlin were jolted awake by an earth-shaking explosion. What they didn't know was that the world's largest cylindrical aquarium, known as the Aquadom, had just shattered, sending over 260,000 gallons of saltwater flooding through the building. The collapse of this towering 82-foot-tall aquarium was a disaster unlike anything seen before. For years, the Aquadom had been an architectural wonder, featuring a transparent elevator that gave visitors a panoramic view of the tropical fish inside. But beneath its beauty lay a fatal flaw. The massive tank was made of acrylic glass, a material known for its durability, but also for its vulnerability to long-term stress. Investigators later determined that microfractures had formed in the tank over time, possibly due to temperature fluctuations and constant pressure. When the structure finally failed, it caused widespread destruction, killing most of the 1,500 exotic fish housed inside and damaging the hotel's lower floors. Miraculously, no human lives were lost. The disaster raised concerns about the long-term durability of large-scale glass structures under extreme environmental conditions. But sometimes it's not just materials that fail. Sometimes entire bridges collapse due to design flaws, as seen in South Korea's tragic Seongsu Bridge disaster. 8. The Seongsu Bridge collapse, a disaster of neglected maintenance. On the morning of October 21, 1994, rush-hour traffic filled the Seongsu Bridge in Seoul, South Korea. The bridge, a vital transportation link over the Han River, had stood for 15 years without any signs of distress. But at 7:38 a.m., a 60-meter section of the structure suddenly gave way, plunging cars and a packed commuter bus into the river below. 32 people were killed, and 17 more were seriously injured in one of South Korea's most shocking infrastructure failures. Investigations revealed that the collapse was entirely preventable. The bridge had been built with steel trusses, a common design for long-span structures, but years of exposure to moisture had caused extensive corrosion in its support beams. Engineers had failed to conduct proper inspections, and warning signs like visible cracks had been ignored. When the weakened section finally gave out, it was only a matter of time. The disaster prompted a nationwide reevaluation of bridge safety, leading to stricter maintenance protocols and mandatory inspections for aging structures. But it also served as a grim reminder that neglecting structural upkeep can turn a reliable bridge into a death trap. However, not all disasters are caused by lack of maintenance. Some structures are doomed from the very moment their blueprints are drawn, as was the case with the infamous Tacoma Narrows Bridge. 9. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge, a suspension bridge that danced to its death. On November 7, 1940, strong winds swept through the Tacoma Narrows in Washington state, causing the newly built Tacoma Narrows Bridge to behave in a way no one had ever seen before. Nicknamed Galloping Gertie due to its tendency to sway and ripple unnaturally, the bridge was an engineering marvel that had quickly become infamous for its unusual movements. But that morning, those movements reached a catastrophic level. As wind speeds increased, the bridge began to twist violently, creating massive waves along its deck. Eyewitnesses watched in horror as the roadway buckled and lifted, forming a motion so extreme that at one point the bridge's lanes tilted nearly 45 degrees. Finally, after hours of relentless oscillation, the suspension cables snapped, and the bridge collapsed into the cold waters below. No human lives were lost, but the failure was a massive financial disaster and a significant embarrassment for engineers. The root cause of the collapse was found to be aerodynamic instability. The bridge's design was too light and too flexible, making it highly susceptible to wind forces. The lessons learned from this event led to major advancements in suspension bridge design, including wind tunnel testing and the use of stabilizing structures. But while Tacoma Narrows collapse within months, some disasters take years to unfold, as was the case with Chicago's Aon Center. 10. The Aon Center Marble Crisis, when luxury becomes a liability. Standing at over 1,100 feet tall, the Aon Center in Chicago is an architectural landmark. When it was completed in 1973, it was celebrated for its sleek, modern design, clad entirely in elegant Italian Carrara marble. The choice of material was meant to exude luxury and sophistication, but within just 1 year, a major problem emerged. The marble panels began to crack. Chicago's extreme climate, with its hot summers and freezing winters, caused the marble to expand and contract, placing enormous stress on the facade. Within a few years, some of the panels loosened so much that they became a deadly hazard. In one terrifying incident, a 300-pound slab of marble fell from the building, crashing onto the pavement below. Realizing the danger, the owners had no choice but to remove and replace every marble panel. The process cost $80 million, more than half the price of constructing the building itself. The Aon Center remains standing today, now clad in durable granite instead of fragile marble. But the costly mistake proved an important lesson in material selection. Choosing aesthetics over durability can lead to massive, expensive, and even deadly consequences. However, some construction mistakes don't just cost money, they can turn entire neighborhoods into fire hazards. One such case happened in London, where a seemingly harmless design decision turned deadly. 11. The Grenfell Tower fire, a tragedy, fueled by poor decisions. On the night of June 14, 2017, a fire broke out in the Grenfell Tower, a 24-story residential building in West London. Within minutes, flames spread rapidly up the exterior of the building, trapping hundreds of residents inside. Despite firefighters' best efforts, the fire raged for over 60 hours, claiming 72 lives and leaving a nation in shock. What made the Grenfell Tower fire so devastating wasn't just the fire itself, it was how quickly it spread. Investigations revealed that the building's exterior had recently been renovated with aluminum composite cladding, a material chosen for its modern look and cost-effectiveness. However, this cladding was highly flammable, turning the building into a towering inferno once the fire reached the facade. The disaster exposed major flaws in fire safety regulations, revealing that similar materials had been used in other high-rise buildings. Public outrage led to an overhaul of fire safety standards, and efforts to remove dangerous cladding from buildings worldwide were accelerated. Grenfell Tower became a symbol of the dangers of cost-cutting in construction, one that came at the ultimate price. But while this failure was due to poor material choices, some disasters occurred due to the collapse of an entire foundation, as was the case with China's Banqiao Dam failure. 12. The Banqiao Dam collapse, a flood of unimaginable destruction. In August 1975, heavy rainfall from Typhoon Nina battered China's Henan province, placing immense pressure on the Banqiao Dam, one of the country's largest hydroelectric projects. Designed to withstand extreme conditions, the dam was considered an engineering triumph until it wasn't. The dam had been constructed using a build fast, reinforce later approach, with materials that were believed to be strong enough to endure heavy rain. But as the typhoon brought record-breaking rainfall exceeding what the dam was designed to handle, its walls began to weaken. Cracks formed, and despite desperate attempts to release water, the structure gave way. What followed was a catastrophe of biblical proportions. A massive wall of water surged downstream, wiping out entire villages and cities in its path. An estimated 170,000 people lost their lives due to the flood and the resulting famine. It remains one of the deadliest dam failures in history, highlighting the consequences of underestimating nature's power. The Banqiao Dam collapse reshaped China's approach to dam construction and emergency flood control, but it was a lesson learned at an enormous cost. However, some disasters aren't caused by natural forces. They result from human-made miscalculations in engineering, as seen in the collapse of Brazil's Rio-Niterói bridge during construction. 13. The Rio-Niterói bridge collapse, a project that fell apart before it began. In the late 1960s, Brazil embarked on one of its most ambitious infrastructure projects, the construction of the Rio-Niterói Bridge. Designed to span over 8 miles across Guanabara Bay, the bridge would link the cities of Rio de Janeiro and Niterói, significantly reducing travel time. It was meant to be a modern engineering marvel, but early signs of trouble suggested otherwise. During construction, a major segment of the bridge collapsed, killing dozens of workers. The failure was traced to flawed calculations in the structural design, which underestimated the forces acting on the bridge's support system. Engineers had not fully accounted for the combined effects of wind pressure, tidal forces, and the weight of the structure itself. The disaster forced a complete reassessment of the project, delaying its completion by several years. While the bridge was eventually completed in 1974 and remains in use today, the collapse served as a stark warning about the importance of rigorous structural analysis in large-scale projects. Unlike Rio-Niterói, another famous bridge failure was so disastrous that it had to be completely replaced: the tragic Morandi Bridge collapse in Italy. 14. The Morandi Bridge collapse, a disaster that could have been prevented. On August 14, 2018, the Morandi Bridge in Genoa, Italy, suddenly collapsed during heavy rain, sending dozens of cars plunging into the rubble below. 43 people lost their lives in a disaster that left Italy mourning and searching for answers. At the time of its collapse, the Morandi Bridge was over 50 years old, an essential part of Italy's highway system. However, concerns had been raised about its structural integrity for years. The bridge was built using reinforced concrete with a unique cable-stayed design. But over time, the concrete had deteriorated, and the steel cables had corroded due to exposure to moisture and pollution. Despite these known issues, maintenance efforts were delayed or ignored due to bureaucratic hurdles and financial constraints. Investigators later determined that the collapse was entirely preventable. Had urgent repairs been carried out earlier, the disaster could have been avoided. The tragedy led to major changes in Italy's infrastructure safety regulations, pushing for stricter inspections and immediate intervention when warning signs appear. But while the Morandi Bridge collapse was due to decades of neglect, some failures happened because of short-sighted cost-cutting decisions, as was the case with the Hard Rock Hotel collapse in New Orleans. 15. The Hard Rock Hotel collapse, a disaster in the heart of New Orleans. On October 12, 2019, construction workers were making final preparations on the new Hard Rock Hotel in downtown New Orleans. The multi-million-dollar project was supposed to be a stunning addition to the city's skyline. But just before noon, the upper floors suddenly gave way, sending tons of concrete and steel crashing down. 3 workers were killed, and several others were left trapped in the wreckage. Investigations revealed that cost-cutting decisions and rushed construction had played a significant role in the collapse. The building's structural support was insufficient, particularly on the upper floors, where thinner and weaker steel beams had been used to reduce costs. This design flaw created unstable load distribution, making the entire structure vulnerable to failure. Workers had already reported concerns about unstable flooring and creaking sounds in the days leading up to the collapse. However, instead of stopping construction to reassess safety, work continued. The disaster highlighted the dangers of prioritizing speed and cost over structural integrity. Following the collapse, lawsuits and investigations pushed for tighter building regulations and better oversight of high-rise developments. The Hard Rock Hotel remains an unfinished ruin, a haunting reminder that cutting corners in construction can have deadly consequences. But sometimes even buildings designed to be secure and functional end up being environmental hazards, as was the case with London's Walkie-talkie skyscraper. 16. The Walkie-talkie skyscraper, a building that melted cars. When London's Walkie-talkie skyscraper was completed in 2014, it was meant to be an architectural icon. Officially named 20 Fenchurch Street, its curved glass design was intended to reflect the city's modern skyline. But within weeks, the building had earned a more sinister reputation. It was melting cars parked on the street below. The skyscraper's concave glass facade created an unintended and highly dangerous effect. It acted like a giant magnifying glass, focusing sunlight into intense heat beams directed at the street. The concentrated sunlight was so powerful that it warped car panels, melted bicycle seats, and even burned sections of nearby buildings. In some cases, temperatures in the reflected spots reached over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The issue became an international embarrassment, forcing the building's developers to install sunshades on the facade to break up the reflected light. While no lives were lost, the incident served as a stark reminder that even small miscalculations in design can have major consequences. The Walkie-talkie building's problem was eventually fixed, but some architectural failures are far more difficult to correct. One such case was the infamous Sydney Opera House, an engineering nightmare that took far longer and cost far more than anyone ever expected. 17. The Sydney Opera House, a beautiful disaster. The Sydney Opera House is one of the most recognizable buildings in the world, known for its unique sail-like roof and stunning waterfront location. But while it stands today as a marvel of architecture, its construction was anything but smooth. When Danish architect Jørn Utzon designed the building in the 1950s, his vision pushed engineering capabilities to their limits. The Opera House was supposed to be completed in 4 years with a budget of $7 million Australian dollars. But by the time it opened in 1973, the project had taken 14 years and cost over $100 million, nearly 1,300% over budget. One of the biggest challenges was the roof design, which consisted of massive concrete shells that had never been built before. Engineers struggled for years to find a way to construct them, constantly revising and scrapping plans. The political turmoil surrounding the project eventually forced Utzon to resign before the building was completed. While the Opera House is now a symbol of Australia, it remains one of the most expensive and troubled construction projects in history. But while it eventually became a success, some projects were doomed from the start, like the tragic case of Sweden's Vasa warship. 18. The Vasa, a warship that sank within minutes. On August 10, 1628, the Swedish Navy launched the Vasa, a massive warship designed to be the most powerful vessel of its time. Adorned with elaborate carvings and loaded with dozens of cannons, the ship was meant to showcase Sweden's naval strength. But within 1,300 meters of setting sail, the unthinkable happened. The ship tipped to one side, took on water, and sank in front of a crowd of spectators. The disaster wasn't caused by enemy attack or bad weather. It was an engineering failure. The Vasa was too top-heavy, with too much weight concentrated on the upper decks and not enough ballast below to counterbalance it. The ship was so unstable that even a light gust of wind was enough to send it overboard. Investigations revealed that builders had ignored early stability tests, likely due to pressure from the king to complete the ship quickly. The Vasa lay at the bottom of Stockholm's harbor for over 300 years, until it was recovered in the 1960s. It is now preserved in a museum as a warning of what happens when ambition overshadows good engineering. While the Vasa disaster was an embarrassment for Sweden, it didn't claim any lives. Unfortunately, some construction failures result in massive loss of life, as seen in one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, the Chernobyl reactor explosion. 19. The Chernobyl reactor explosion, a nuclear disaster rooted in design flaws. On April 26, 1986, the world witnessed one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union suffered a catastrophic explosion, releasing massive amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Entire towns were evacuated, and the disaster left a toxic legacy that continues to impact the region today. While many associate the disaster with human error, a major part of the failure was due to flaws in the reactor's design. The RBMK reactor used at Chernobyl had a fatal weakness. It became unstable at low power levels and lacked a proper containment structure to prevent radiation leaks in the event of an accident. On the night of the explosion, engineers were conducting a safety test to see how the reactor would behave during a power outage. Due to poor communication and lack of proper safety protocols, the operators unknowingly pushed the reactor into a dangerously unstable state. When they attempted to shut it down, a massive steam explosion tore through the facility, destroying Reactor 4 and sending radioactive debris across Europe. The Chernobyl disaster led to significant reforms in nuclear safety, forcing countries worldwide to reevaluate their reactor designs and emergency procedures. But while nuclear disasters like Chernobyl were unforeseen, some construction mistakes are doomed from the start, like the infamous John Hancock Tower in Boston. 20. The John Hancock Tower, a skyscraper that couldn't handle the wind. When the John Hancock Tower was completed in the 1970s, it was supposed to be a sleek, modern addition to Boston's skyline. Instead, it quickly became a symbol of architectural failure. Within months of its completion, giant glass panels began falling from the building's facade, crashing onto the streets below. The tower's windows were designed to be large and reflective, giving it a futuristic look. However, engineers underestimated the impact of wind pressure on the structure. As strong winds pushed against the glass, entire panels popped out, forcing city officials to close streets around the building due to falling debris. To make matters worse, the entire building swayed excessively in high winds. The movement was so extreme that people inside the upper floors suffered from motion sickness. Eventually, engineers had to redesign the glass panels and install a massive tuned mass damper, a system of counterweights that helped stabilize the building against wind-induced movement. The John Hancock Tower remains standing today, but its troubled early years serve as a lesson in the importance of rigorous wind and material testing in skyscraper construction. Like many of the construction failures on this list, it proved that even the most visually impressive designs can turn into costly disasters when engineering fundamentals are overlooked. Throughout history, these 20 construction mistakes have demonstrated one undeniable truth. When ambition, cost-cutting, or negligence outweighs proper engineering, disaster is never far behind. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.